Hi, everyone. Hi. My name is Kate, and I'm really excited to welcome you here to the People's Forum. If you haven't been here before, we are a political education space, a community space, a cafe, basically a gathering center. We want to encourage conversations around leftists all over the world so we can build together. I work at 1804 Books, which is the bookstore you passed on your way in. I encourage you to take a look, of course. But we also have a lot of other offerings like book talks, movie screenings, concerts, dance workshops, art workshops, our own political education, and a lot of our offerings are hybrid. So whether you're in New York or somewhere else in the world, we invite you to follow us on social media, check out our websites, follow our newsletter, all of that stuff so you can stay updated on everything we're up to. I'm not going to talk too much because I know we're really excited to get into the talk itself, but I'm really excited to have tonight's book talk on revolution around the corner because it really resonates with us here as a space that's fighting for the liberation of people all over the world from US imperialism. So I'll hand it over to Kazembe to give a more thorough introduction. But thank you to all of the wonderful speakers who are here tonight, and thank you all for being here.
Hello, is this thing on? Yo. First of all, thank you so much to the People's Forum and this beautiful space we have here tonight. It's a real resource. I was here last like 2-3 weeks ago, and people downstairs in the basement like making flyers and banners. It reminded me of the old days. You know what I'm saying? When you go down all the way down and start making stuff. You know what I'm saying? It starts from the bottom and you go up. You know. My name is Kazembe Balagun, and I'm really, really happy just to be here. And it's a pleasure to be emceeing and talking about this really wonderful book, Revolution Around the Corner, Voices of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party in the United States. You know, for me, this book is kind of like Star Wars because I got introduced to the first book, which was what, Voices of the Diaspora? Yeah, Puerto Rican Movement, Voices of the Diaspora, you know, and I was like, whoa, that was like Return of the Jedi for me. I was like, that's like an amazing book because when I was talking to Carmen and Jose, first of all, give it up to Carmen and Jose, you know, who are two of the book editors, along with Andre Torres, who I'm connected to because I went to high school with his nephew up in the South Bronx at Cardinal Hayes. And I'm good friends online with Orlando, which is your son, which I was always trying to get in contact with y'all all the time. But like I was mentioning before, this book was very important to me because I had read the Puerto Rican movement first, and I was blown away. And I didn't realize that history could be that exciting, that personal, that caring, that serious, and that in-depth. And a lot of times when we're talking about the history of our movements, specifically coming from the place of people of color, third world liberation movements, it always starts from a place of tragedy, you know, and deep loss. But what I found in this specific work, in this genealogy that I read, that it started out with love and it was a family affair. And so then what I began to think about was just drawing the family trees of the communities that were created through this movement. And it took me back to the work that me and my sister, Lenina Nadal, who was my dear sister, we've known each other for over 20 years. If I can just tell you a story, there's a story that I have. Next week is my birthday. All right, now okay, it's next week is my birthday. All right, around the same time that Nirvana came out with their album, I was in the third album. Biggie Smalls came out with this maybe second album. This is the late 90s. I'm in a class with Harry Rodriguez called the Puerto Rican Nationalism at Hunter College, as I affectionately called it, UCLA, the University on the corner of Lexington Avenue. And then at that time, I was in a class with Harry Rodriguez, and Harry Rodriguez, if you guys don't know, Harry Rodriguez was one of the sharpest, best professors in the whole world. Does people know who Harry Rodriguez was? You know, and then, so I'm in this class, and I wrote a paper on Audre Lorde and references to Caribbean and Puerto Rico. And what I learned about from Puerto Rican nationalism that I referenced to Audre Lorde. And then I gave a presentation and I got an A in the class, I'm very proud to say. But then someone busted in. It was a Palestinian sister by the name of Sabrine. And she said, 7 people just got arrested at the CUNY Board of Trustees fighting for open admissions. And I realized at that moment that, all right, this moment of me being in this Puerto Rican nationalist class is in direct lineage, genealogy, to many movements I had before me in the 1960s. So then we were the kind of like the grandkids, you know what I'm saying? Like what is Godard said, you know, that you know, we're the grandchildren of Marx and Coca-Cola, you know? And so that solidified my understanding of my own understanding of what my place in the movement inside that it was. Because I was taking a class, that time my degree was in Black and Puerto Rican studies. You know, so if you study Black studies, you had to take 12 credits of Puerto Rican history. If you study Puerto Rican studies, you had to take 12 credits of Black history. And so we were conjoined together, right? And I'm just saying this to say, and this, I'm, you know, and I don't want to belabor it too long, but it takes me back to this idea around the familial, the family, in this particular book, The Revolution Around the Corner, because when I first read this book, I was really taken aback by the fact that it really was a family affair. And when I read some of the work of people like Bernardo Vega, some of the folks like José Salón, you see the names on the street corners that come out. So this idea of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party being hybrid, being both on the island and in the mainland, those organic connections produce an organic movement, produce an organic intellectual life that's a reflection of a mirror of this book. And so it's an honor to be here because it's really about survival, but it's also about the dignity of our own movements to write our own history. And for us as survivors, for those who are veterans of this, and those who are learning more of this, for us to be here to talk about it and to gain those lessons. So that's why I'm here. And that's why I think, you know, and this is the energy that I think tonight with this fabulous panel we have of Lenina, Ted Glick, Carmen, José, will be be in conversation with each other on this issue of what are the lessons learned from the PSP, but also the lessons learned and how do we move forward in this particular movement. So I wanted to stop right there because I know that we do have a film, a clip of a film, and I believe I'm going to turn it over to, yes, absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm gonna pass the microphone over to Carmen, who's going to talk a little bit about the film. Thank y'all so much.
Okay. I don't know if I even need this. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. So glad to see new faces and other faces that are known. And there are a lot of people that I believe are also online on YouTube. We had earlier already about 13 people, so there are more that have joined, and we welcome them as well. Just a quick, I just wanted to say something quickly, that what you're gonna see is a teaser, not a trailer, and something that is in the works. But I want you to see it first, and then I would like for one of the directors of the film, Teresa Basilio, who is with us tonight, to just tell you a little bit about what the film is about. And so let's go to the film, okay?
Compañeras y compañeros, the organizers of this magnificent magnificent demonstration cannot be congratulated too many times. This is a truly historic meeting in solidarity with the struggle for Puerto Rican independence. We have to understand that when we raise the cry for the independence of Puerto Rico, it is not a question of abstract justice. It's a question of struggling for our own freedom. The freedom of Puerto Rico is the first condition for all of our freedoms. Black people, Asians, Indians, Chicanos, and all working people, whatever their color might be.
If you're doing your work properly, you have a feeling of where people want to go, what they're ready to do. And your role as a leader is to propose that they take that step. And that's the most valuable lesson I learned in the PSP. If you read it right and people are ready to do it, and you take the step, they're going to follow. Part of our role in the United States was not only to organize the Puerto Rican community around issues that affected us directly, but also mobilize around the independence of Puerto Rico. We did not see a difference between Puerto Ricans in the United States and Puerto Rico, same nation. And so, we wanted to draw those struggles together, looking for some spectacular way to do it. We were in this meeting. The head of the PSP in this country, Ramon Albona, looked at me and said, "We have to find a big place. Where are big places?" So we said, "You got the Manhattan Center. So how many does it hold?" 3,000. He said, "Bigger." Right? And a couple of places in the Bronx, maybe hold 4,000 or 5,000. No. Hasta más grande. I said, "Well, Ramon, this Madison Square Garden, that holds 20,000. And then I saw his eyes light up. And he said, "That's the one." I said, "Ramon, it's Madison Square Garden. You don't fill Madison Square Garden with a political activity around the independence of Puerto Rico." And he said, "What do you mean you don't? Nobody ever has." And he said, "Yes, but we're going to. And then someone will have." My job was to coordinate the action. You always got to organize your own solidarity. You got to organize everything with human beings. We organized solidarity committees nationwide. I was on a plane at least once a week, every week. I would go and I'd make a pitch. Why is Puerto Rico important to you? Puerto Rico is important to you because your country maintains a classical colony. That's important as a military base, that's important as a portion of the U.S. capitalist economy. And that's important because it gives this country the legal right to enslave another country. It's the legalization of imperialism. So the struggle of Puerto Rico is you struggle. Take it on or not, it's there. Now, keep in mind, I'm 24 years old. I'm given the responsibility of coordinating the organization of the largest action in favor of Puerto Rican independence in the history of the United States of America. While I was confident that we could do it, I was also scared. Every night I would go home and say, "Are you sure I'm the guy that's supposed to be doing this?" To myself. How did this happen, But keep in mind, I had behind me one of the most powerful left-wing organizations of that period. The Puerto Rican Socialist Party organized with this vanguard concept. You know, you recruited into the party community leadership. People who were the most conscious in the community, most respected. And each of those people represented 10, 20, 30 people. Just need that one person. What we call the vanguard. And we did it through the newspaper, selling Claridad. They pay for the newspaper, and then you talk to them about some article or some action that's taking place. That's how we mobilize our base. That's how the garden action happened. It was a Sunday. The action was scheduled to begin at 12 noon. So the action starts. The garden is almost empty because they just started letting people in. Peary makes his speech. The lights go up, and I look up at the thing and it's just filled. I had never seen so many people in my life. It's hard to define what the greatest moments of your life are. I think like your birth would be, you know, like that, my kid's birth, my, you know, this and that. There are 5 or 6 of them. That's definitely one of them. That specific moment when I looked up and I saw the whole garden, Madison Square Garden full. The main lesson of the Madison Square Garden thing is fundamentally, I think it's spiritual. Since that time, I have never had a second of doubt about the power of the human race to make fundamental change in this world and build a just and equitable society. That the human race is going to make a revolution. Never. You have to depart from the premise that everybody wants to make a revolution. Our job isn't to convince people. Our job is to show them how.
So the reference there of Alfredo to his son's birth is he was pointing to Karim Lopez, who is the director of the film, with Teresa Basilio. And so I'd like for Teresa to just give a few words about what the film is going to be about.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hey. Yeah, so we are making this film. So myself and Karim Lopez, that Carmen mentioned, is the oldest son of Alfredo Lopez, he's a filmmaker, as I am, and also with Carmen and Vivian. And the film, it's a documentary in the sense that we have as you saw here, some very much like interviews with folks who were involved in the PSP in the US. And we're also looking to do more verite style, following people around, other Puerto Rican organizers from different generations, talking about how this history and how the current legacy, right? Like what's going on now and how this reflects really our intergenerational struggle, right? And kind of like what Kazembe was saying about being rooted in love and family and the dignity of being able to tell our stories, that's what project is about for us. It really is very much about that. And we are in the process of, right now, I have one shoot coming up in Puerto Rico in like next month. But we're really in the beginning phases of it. So we are looking for donations, of course. And if you go to Third World Newsreel, which is our fiscal sponsor, they have a page, a donation page. And in there, you can scroll down and find Puerto Rican Socialist Party documentary if that's something you want to support. But we're also looking for folks who, different generations who maybe are new to this story, are new to this legacy, and want to engage in a conversation with myself and Karim and Carmen Vivian. So if that applies to you, or if you know some people who would be interested in participating, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and it was a wonderful, wonderful clip and a teaser. Looking forward to that. And I want to invite José Velázquez to say a few words about the book before we get into the panel discussion. How you doing, José?
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd like to begin, if we can, with a moment of silence for all the people who were executed in Buffalo this past weekend, victims of right-wing domestic terrorism, and also not just Buffalo. This is this whole week nationwide. It's almost like a coordinated attack on people of color. So if we can, take just a moment of silence to let all those folks know that we are with them and they are with us. Thank you. First of all, I want to let you know that Vivian, besides the issue of the film and all that, Vivian is the one who came up with the title of this book, Revolution Around the Corner. And maybe later she'll say some words about that. But one of the things we like to do in these forums is that we like to talk very little. And we want to space time for you to talk to us. It's more listening tour. So rather than getting into all kind of details about the book and all that stuff, I put together a 5-minute prose in a poetic form about what the book is about. And so that I could just spend 5 minutes on it, and then we could move on to some of our authors, and then to you, because it's really what it's all about. So the prose that I put together is called Revolution Around the Corner, is the story of. So the theme is the story of how colonialism and forced U.S. citizenship led to a mass migration of Puerto Ricans to the United States, leading to the unique situation where the population of Puerto Ricans in the USA exceeds that of Puerto Rico itself. Unbelievable. It's the story of how Puerto Ricans in the United States through various generations, participate in the struggle for independence of Puerto Rico, while at the same time struggling against oppression within the United States. It's a struggle which is complex, often contradictory, and continues to this day. It's the story of how an organization dealt with the complexities of the Puerto Rican population in the US. It's multi-generational, multilingual, geographical differences. It's the story of a variety of experiences of Puerto Rican activists based on their experiences within the PSP. It's the story of an organization of a Marxist-Leninist party led from Puerto Rico and the creation of an autonomous branch in the United States. The story sheds light, critical light, on Marxism-Leninism and its practice within the PSP. It's the story of how misplaced beliefs of revolution around the corner and an imminent crisis of colonialism led to the development of the ideology and the practice of the PSP. It's the story of how the PSP missed many opportunities to lead the struggles of the Puerto Rican people in the United States, particularly in the electoral and in the labor movement. It's the story about the struggles within the movement, the women's movement, racism, gay rights. It's the story about the relationship of the Puerto Rican left with a mostly white left in the United States, as well as with African American, Mexican Americans, the women's movement, and others. And finally, it's the story of the lessons and challenges facing the Puerto Rican left, as well as the entire left in the United States, in a struggle that continues today.
You know, Jose, I think you're ready for TikTok. Cause that was quick. That was less than 5 minutes, I think. I'm really, how y'all feeling? Right on, right on. I am excited because I think that, you know, there's so much, as Jose indicated in that brief 4.34 second synopsis. This is a juicy topic. This history of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, and I'm just happy that folks who have been a part of the movement are on the stage right now, but also in the audience, to be sharing their experiences, both personal and political. And so I want to just kind of maybe turn it over to Ted, and maybe Ted, maybe you can start us off, and I'll follow up with Lenina. Talk a little bit about, introduce yourself, and talk a little about what your relationship to the Puerto Rican Socialist Party is and was, and what brought you here tonight. Take Glick.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to thank Vivian and Jose and Andy for inviting me. I definitely, my memories, my experiences with the PSP back in the 70s into the 80s were very important ones in terms of my own both political and personal development. My first contact with PSP was through Alfredo. Alfredo came to a meeting in Washington, D.C. in the fall of 1974 that was about trying to form an alternative to the Democrats and Republicans in the United States. Arthur Kanoy, who some of you may know of, was one of the primary initiators of this effort. And I was into that. I had actually spent a year in prison for draft resistance to the Vietnam War. And one of the things I did in prison was think about how do we change this country? And I came out of it feeling like we really needed to build a broad, progressive alternative to politics, the politics and obviously the economics of the society, and that led me to this group that was trying to form what was called the Mass Party of the People as a alternative to the two corporate parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And Alfredo was there. And I was so impressed by Alfredo. I had experiences with other Marxist-Leninist groups, mainly white Marxist-Leninist groups, and had pretty much been turned off by all of them. Found them pretty rigid, kind of in a lot of ways out of touch with what the realities of US society were, dogmatic often. But Alfredo wasn't like that. He was very smart, very intelligent, very down to earth. And frankly, that's where in some ways, I think I almost learned there about the reality of Puerto Rico as a colony. I mean, I kind of knew it maybe, right? But he did a lot to get me to move to understand that reality. And this was the fall of 1974. People may know that it was about 6-7 months later that the U.S. Troops were kicked out of Vietnam. In April 30th, 1975, people may remember the scenes of the troops, the people in the U.S. Embassy in what was then Saigon, and getting onto the helicopters and so on, because the Liberation Army was taking over all of Vietnam. And so it was like, that was clearly in the cards, even at that point in time. That was the way things were going. So there was this very easy connection for me to go from a lot of work that I had been doing, fighting that war, spending a year in prison for it, to seeing that I had a responsibility as a white North American to take up this fight. You know, it's a U.S. colony. This is something that I should be concerned about and I should be active with. And so I got involved and ended up becoming part of the Puerto Rico Solidarity Committee. I went to Puerto Rico, was invited to go on a delegation. That was great, wonderful, with other activists from the Solidarity Committee, and just continued for a long time working together. Just the one other thing I'll say, there was a lot about PSP that was really, kind of revelatory to me, opened my eyes, taught me a lot. One of the things that I have learned in retrospect to appreciate at least as much as anything else was the understanding that social change, political change doesn't happen unless you're able to unite a broad range of political forces. It can't be done by some small group that might have the correct politics or be willing to fight really hard, et cetera. Those things are important, but ultimately the masses make history. And I saw the PSP understanding that and seeing the need to bring groups together so there could be kind of a mass movement to make change. So that's enough for me.
Yeah, Lenina.
Hi, everybody. So if the question is my involvement in the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, was that I wasn't a member of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. My parents were. And so basically Carmen and Andy had asked to get a perspective from a group of us, and there is a chapter in the book of children of members of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, or militantes. There's different ranks, right? So my parents were militantes of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, and my mother got involved through the fact that both of her brothers were drafted for the Vietnam War and were sent to Vietnam. And while they were there, she recognized the incredible inequity of that. And her mother being already a community organizer, my grandfather was a cook, and she had seen many ways. My grandmother died when she was 40 or so, younger than I am now. because of working in a laundry and dealing with the environmental effects of that and getting tuberculosis. And so, I don't know, in these times of COVID, these things become really relevant, right? Who suffers from these diseases. And so all of those things shaped her and I think made her entry into the party. And like you were saying about how things kind of flow, you know, that involvement and political foundation of the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, which allowed for their political understanding of Marxism and Leninism. My father entering more through my mom and as an artist and as a translator of Juan Maribra's text for the for Claridad. You know, both of them met and everything, and basically used all of that as a political foundation for what they had done as political activists in Brooklyn College. They fought for the very first Puerto Rican Studies Department, and this was in conjunction with Africana Studies. And so it's like, you know, that in itself is a huge accomplishment when, you know, recently they just celebrated the 50th anniversary of Puerto Rican Studies at Brooklyn College, which had reverberations throughout CUNY. So just to show that like these movements are, you know, movements build upon movements. And then in my generation, as you know, Kazembe is here and spoke a little bit about how we met. And yeah, we were part of an organization that in many ways was responding to a repression that began in the 1970s when there was a shift in terms of the fact that tuition was now being charged to students, which started sort of the gentrification of public university in the city. And we were in a generation where they were trying to cut, you know, the Sikh programs, the Black and Puerto Rican Studies programs, and other programs that were essentially keeping people of color within the university. And that was our struggle. And I would say that my parents' involvement in their lessons and like being able to connect with them as comrades, as people who were mentors, became relevant. And when I was young, I didn't even, to be honest, I was mostly raised by my grandparents, you know, like I wrote in the book, you know, watching novelas, going to church with my step-grandmother. And so I didn't really know until I went to college the impact that they had and the amount of work they had done to really you know, do work within the Puerto Rican Socialist Party and beyond, right, within CUNY and beyond. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, because there are other people who contributed to the book that are here, and there may be many others out there watching on YouTube. But I would like to recognize some of those who also wrote chapters in the book. Zoilo Torres, who's here, Olga Sanabria. Teresa wrote with me the chapter that we did on the personalist political and the focus group with the children of the PSP. So in addition to Lenina, I see that we have Camilo Matos here as well. And is that my son Orlando? That is. Okay, Orlando also. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that because there are other people who are here also from other organizations, like Victor Quintana, who was with El Comité Mur. And other comrades, Ana Juarbe, Carlos, Angel Roman. great. So yeah, let's open up.
Yeah, just in the spirit of what Jose and Vivian said earlier, we don't want to talk a lot up here on the stage, so we wanted to open up to the floor to questions, reflections, declarations. Anyone can just raise their hand and we'll get started, okay? Okay, right on. Is that your name, please?
Hi, Angel Roman. It seems in the last few years, there's been a surge of books around the 50th anniversary of our movements. We have the Young Lords and El Comité and PSP. And what comes up is how relevant is it for folks in our moment in time? And what I appreciate about the book, I haven't read every chapter, but how there was room for criticism. And it's not just all the great work that was done, which there was great work done, but there was a reflection and analysis. And I guess the question is, upon reflecting in your chapters, what lessons, if you were to be able to bring that back, can you speak to us about for now and its relevancy?
Round and keep, yeah, keep it moving. Sorry, I'm not keep it moving. Yeah.
Anybody else? Maybe somebody has a comment.
That'll be a question, could be a comment.
You've been having a lot of these conversations. So the period is different. We are clearly, people are more aware that revolution is not around the corner. So how do people respond to, or what questions do they have, knowing that it's not the same moment as in the 60s and 70s when there were mass movements for civil rights, women's movements, environmental movements. There was an effervescence of activity. Now the latest activity we had here was Black Lives Matter, and we had millions of people go out in last summer, but that energy dissipated, it seems, fairly quickly. We hope we'll see now how people respond to these atrocities, this this terrorism. But I was just curious to see what kind of questions you're receiving from people who hear the talk and say, well, we're in a different moment. How does your lessons pertain to our period, and how can we begin to engage in this motion for radical change?
Thank you. Yeah, my question is that one of the parts of the book that I found very interesting was the role that the Puerto Rican Socialist Party played in community organizing around issues like bilingual education, housing. And I'm wondering, one of the intent of the book is to pass it to the next generation. And I'm wondering, how effective do you see that happening? How effective is the transfer of the community involvement and struggle to the Puerto Rican people here in the diaspora, and in amplifying the role that the Puerto Rican diaspora plays in the independence of Puerto Rico?
We'll start with those three, or should we continue?
I guess I want to kind of combine two of these questions in some ways. Lessons learned, and then the difference of now, to then that period in the past. And I want to use actually the title of the book as to respond to some of that, because on the one hand, there are two things that played out in I think people thinking during the period that we were organizing that the revolution was around the corner. One of them is that because that set up such an urgency, such a feeling of we have to get moving, we have to get ready, we have to be out there doing work. That was a motivation for us. That was what kind of sparked a passion for us to do the work. And you need that. You need that to build a movement. Movements don't just get built because there are many different issues that are happening out there, and that there are, contradictions that we see in our life, that we're not, getting paid enough to have a decent living. We don't have good health care. Those are all issues that are out there. But what sparks and builds on that is part of what Alfredo was even saying in that teaser, that you have to be able to think about, and this is where the theoretical practices, right, of thinking tactically and strategically. Strategically, we knew what our goal was. Our goal was to make a revolution, to make change. And that change, we wanted it to happen in Puerto Rico and here in the United States. So you needed to feel that motion, right? That energy, that drive. And thinking that the revolution was around the corner gave us that. It created that passion in us to move the work. But then there's the other side, right? There's the other side of the coin to that. And when things don't happen that quickly, then we become impatient. And we were young, many of us, not all of us. There were many also within the PSP of previous generations who knew, esto es para algo. This thing is not gonna happen tomorrow. It is not around the corner. So we have to think long term. And that, I think, is a lesson to bring to the younger generations now who are struggling, who are active. There are movements out there. I participated last Saturday in the march, to save Roe v. Wade. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people crossed that bridge. And there were people all over the country who were demonstrating. There are movements. There are movements, but there are not those kinds of structures that existed when we were organizing that really were more formalized. Formalized, right? Like we were a party. It was a Marxist-Leninist party that had a certain level of discipline and of how you entered it, what you were expected to do. I tell people when I now speak in that was a very, our democratic centralism sometimes favored too much of the centralism and less of the democracy. And so looking at now how organizations are opening themselves up to less of that top-down kind of leadership formation, I think that's a good thing. And I think those are the kinds of things that we saw with something like Black Lives Matter, which continues. It's not that it has disappeared. They are doing a lot of work. We see it in a lot of other of the collective organizations that are out there. We see it in Puerto Rico, the ecological movements, the feminist movements. They're looking at ways of developing leadership that is much more across, horizontal kind of leadership. And that's important. That's important. So I think those are some of the lessons, right? That we need to feel, we need to create some way to have that spark, that kind of motivation to get people to a place where we can make change. We can do it if we work collectively and together. but it's going to take time. It takes time, it takes years, and it takes generations.
Yeah, I'm gonna address Pedro's question, comment about how the PSP focus on community organizing and the role of diaspora. I think one of the important lessons from this book is that the dynamic, often, as I said earlier, contradictory between the struggle of Puerto Ricans in the US and the struggle for independence of Puerto Rico. They are interconnected, but they're not the same thing, per se. Puerto Ricans are here to stay in the US. The millions that are here to stay. If anybody thinks we're all gonna get up and go to Puerto Rico when it becomes independent and all that stuff, soñando con pajarito preñado, as we used to say in Spanish. You're dreaming, you're in a dream world. The PSP was at its best when it was able to do both things. This was an eclectic group of people. We had old nationalists from the MPI to people who came from the Black movement like I did, Andy and Vivian that came from the student movement and, professionals. We had working class people. We had people who couldn't speak Spanish. We had people who couldn't speak English. And all of this, came together around issues of Puerto Ricans in the US. Use the mic? Oh, and then when you had issues on a local basis, and you could say, oh, the struggle on the Lower East Side, where Pedro was from, Pedro was always clear on that, the need to organize around the local community issues. And then you can connect those to how we're a colonial people and about how, and connected to Puerto Rico. That's when the PSP was at its best. In my opinion, it was at its worst when it completely disregarded those issues, thinking that the revolution was around the corner. And why do you have to organize around a housing struggle in the Lower East Side when we're gonna have the insurrection tomorrow, next year? And that's when that misplaced sense of what the Germans called the zeitgeist, what was the spirit of the times. It wasn't just the PSP. This was typical of the American left, of the new left, Prairie Fire, Weather Underground, the student movement, anti-war movement. This lesson about revolution around the corner and its impact on a movement is not just for the Puerto Ricans, it's for the entire left. So Pedro, that's a really, really good question. The diaspora, we all know that, the Puerto Ricans in the US are gonna have a lot to say and do in relationship to the future of Puerto Rico. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I just briefly, I really like what both Vivian and Jose said. In relationship to what Victor asked, I really thought your answer was really very good. I think that the big difference between now, I'm not sure it's true that things are worse now than they were in the 70s in terms of the potential. I actually think the opposite. I think Vivian really put her finger on it, that there's not the level of organization, basically, of the left forces that there was back in the 70s and somewhat into the 80s. But in terms of the masses of the people, in terms of their consciousness, you look at Bernie Sanders, he almost won. A person elected always as an independent, running in the Democratic primary, and who was an open socialist, almost won the nomination of the Democratic Party in 2016. There have been polls that have shown that young people, younger than 30, like 50% of the young people in the United States have a positive view of the word socialism, right? And for the country as a whole, it's 30%. This was a number of years ago. I'm not sure where it is now. It couldn't have changed that much. So, you know, I think the potential is there. The left forces are not organized, and partly for good reasons, for the things that Vivian talked about. You know, that this vertical, top-down, you know, over-centralist of the Democratic centralist operation, you know, people are conscious of that. People understand that contradiction, and we're trying to figure out how to build organizational forms that that work, that really work, and that are democratic, but also efficient and effective, and able to give leadership when needed.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I feel so in one form or another since my 20s, I've tried to stay connected and be involved in political movement. And I think that you know, just the last 2 years has been a huge shift and really has made me very aware of, like, we can't do this whole, I mean, the digital presence is beautiful, right? Like the fact, you know, I wrote about it, that something can happen in this country and be tweeted out and heard in Nigeria or Colombia or, you know, another country, and we can all connect. And like, that is amazing, you know, the fact that right now I'm on calls with people all over the country that are doing different kinds of movement work very locally. That's a beautiful thing. On the other hand, not being able to meet in person, not being able to build community, and community also creating culture. And I think another thing that for me makes the Puerto Rican Socialist Party such a beautiful example, including the Young Lords, including other, you know, sort of nationalist groups, Black nationalist groups as well, is that culture and like was such a draw, right? It was so much a part of the center, art, and so much a part of what invigorates us is being able to be in community with each other, hear each other sing, hear each other read poetry, hear each other, you know, connect, and the loss of that, I really feel like almost a depression in the last couple of years amongst young people, not really having that space to do, you know, make a banner, like, you know, and have 30 people like come and paint a little part of it. Like, these things are important activities that I think create a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. And so for me, that's, I don't know, I think it feels like there's an alienation and an isolation, where we're also receiving information in very segmented ways. So it's difficult for us to kind of know what's going on. You know, like even the Roe v. Wade, there's leftists saying on the, you know, in blogs or YouTube, you know, like, oh, nobody cares about that, you know, or whatever. And like, these are people in our movement. It's like, so wait, but there was thousands of people here, you know what I'm saying? So it's just like, why are we not getting information about who and what and who are the people and the actors right now making things happen, you know? And I think that there is also a little bit, what I see in this younger generation is that there is this shift towards a different kind of relationship to struggle that is more about, okay, like, well, what will it take for us to intentionally build community for like 20 years? You know, like, do we need to learn more about cooperative economics? Do we need to learn more about what it means to come together and purchase land, you know, and you know, own several businesses in a community, and they're just approaching it a little bit differently, and that work is, like you said, a lot slower and a lot less visual than like thousands of people at a protest. But then again, if we do want the thousands of people at a protest, and we do want like a lot more of a confrontation with the state, and to really raise the stakes in that way, that has to be visible, right? And it has to feel like we have to be able to feel the pulse of it the way that we did feel the pulse in the uprisings that happened, you know, around George Floyd, and you know, like we need to feel that pulse, and like so, it is about figuring out when those moments happen, how do we support them, amplify them, and also not become super disillusioned with things. There's been some recent news about, you know, some leadership in the BLM movement, you know, that has been spending money in ways that we would never think to spend money, like buy a mansion and cars and this and that, you know, and these things affect our how can I say, our enthusiasm, morale, right, and investment, and so, you know, but again, it's like this is a very, very small group of people taking these actions. And we can't forget that like, you know, like Ted said, like there's just masses of people out there that want something to happen, that want revolution, that want socialism, that want, you know, anarchism, communism, all these things. So it's like, how do we keep reaching them, you know? And I think that's the challenge. I think we're in a place now where we're just kind of coming back out of this COVID thing, and like, it's just like, for me, that is the challenge, you know?
Oh, maybe I should say something? Oh, wait, you have a question? Oh, yeah. And make sure you use the microphone for the people on YouTube.
Hi. Hi. It's on, right? Okay. What I wanted to bring up in terms of the movement that was created in the Puerto Rican community in the 60s, but mainly 70s and 80s, was the international connection. And that the international connection also has a link to the title of the book, Revolution Around the Corner, because it wasn't just that our community was like up in arms, so to speak, and all the different movements that existed in the United States, but it was also internationally. You had the war in Vietnam that raised a lot of mobilization. You had the independence, about the liberation movement, independence of Algeria, independence movements and decolonization in the African continent, in Asia. And we also had all kinds of guerrilla movements all over Latin America. We had the Cuban Revolution, right? And I think that also really contributed, because it was all around us. Revolution really was all around us, in the United States and all over the world. And in Puerto Rico, there had also been like this huge upsurge of the independence movement, which created a whole range of institutions and other movements. It was like a ripple effect. So I think that's an important issue to bring up also. And I remember the Latin Women's Collective that also had that perspective, and El Comité had that perspective. The Black Panther Party had a lot of links to the movements all over the world, especially Africa. There was also the Palestinian movement and the War of Expansion in 1967. And I think one of the things that the PSP did through leadership that was exerted, really, and political education that we had, was that we really learned to be interested in other peoples, right? Other struggles, other countries, and to really have a love of other struggles besides our own. And I think that really also contributed to this perception, this is really gonna happen very soon, right? Because it was all around us. And just to conclude, my experience, I as an adolescent and early adult and young adult, I lived in El Barrio. And I always say, I didn't go to the Young Lords, they came to me. You know, all I did was step out the door, and I was in a demonstration, I was in a march, I was in some kind of revolution, right? So anyway, I just wanted to really bring up the international issue and how that contributed to this perception of revolution around the corner. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the other?
Victor Quintana talked about how the book deals with a different era and today, but I think the book does it in a very critical manner. This is not nostalgia. So for those of you who get to read the book, this is not about, oh man, all the great things the PSP, did mobilize, 20,000 people to the garden. No, this is critical analysis, lessons that we learned. Because young people always ask me, when we talk about the Young Lords and the PSP, Coño, if you guys were so great, what happened? What happened? I loved Hillary Clinton's book title, What Happened? After she lost the election, after everything happened except her. Everybody else was responsible for what happened. But that's the question that we have to answer to young people is, well, what happened? Because as Ted pointed out, the demise of this party and these organizations had a big impact on the struggle. A large vacuum was created, as Lenina was pointing out. So, we need to talk about what happened and what went wrong, including looking at Marxism, Leninism, and this book does look at it from a very critical point of view. So I just want to point out, hopefully you'll read it and understand that this is bringing out a lot of criticism of the movement that we all participated in.
Right.
I have a couple, sorry, I'll go to you in a sec. I have a couple of questions from our very robust YouTube audience. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, YouTube,
from
yeah.
YouTube. We've got about 20, 30 people watching.
Outer
So
space.
they're with you in spirit.
Shout out to outer space.
The first one is from Maria. If you could please reflect on the national spread of PSP organizing efforts and the impacts that they left. I think this kind of speaks to the vacuum that you're speaking of. In that vein, also related to the criticisms you're talking about, Amina asks, for the panel, have your political views changed? And if so, how? Do you have any regrets, and what do you think could have been different? And Luis asks, I was curious if any of you had any advice on joining an organization for PR liberation. Are there particular resources or people we can get in contact with? So those are 3 questions.
So the question. Professor Torres has a question too.
I don't know how I'm going to come in on this now, but a lot of times I start out thinking one thing.
Yeah, so yeah.
Can you say, oh yeah? Now,
This is closer to your mouth.
Okay. So I don't know how this is going to come out, but I start out oftentimes with one idea and then, so be patient. I was locked into the question about lessons from the experience and how useful they may be for the young people of today, for the current generation of activists. And I think that while we very much welcome that interest, I would caution young people today to think that we have some silver bullets and quick answers to this dilemma of what is to be done now in 2022 going forward. this is really your historical conjuncture, the young people of today. And young people of today could be anywhere from your teen years to your 30s and 40s, as far as I'm concerned. Don't forget that there is up to a 30 or 40-year difference between what you're going through and what we went through. So how relevant is that experience? I can say that I think we were very intentional and thoughtful about extracting, especially the mistakes that we made, and trying to parlay that into useful bits for activists of today. If there was one big issue that I personally have a bone always to pick with about today's movements, it's, I think the left in particular may be afraid. They may be intimidated by all the social movements that are out there today. And sometimes they don't want to sully their hands with the nitty-gritty, tough organizing that is being, I think, is being attempted by social movements of today. What intimidates them, I think, is this big question of formal politics, right? The left, whether it wants to acknowledge it or not, cannot make transformational change without first a transformation of that big elephant in the living room, which is the Democratic Party. That is where tens of millions of people who are working class, who are poor, who have a high level of political consciousness, that's where they are. The majority of that population that we seek to work with and to move in a strong, powerful direction, you don't have to look too far. They're in that party. Not all of them, and not all of the people who represent the future of change in this country, because there is huge alienated populations, right? Again, maybe 65% of the American people vote. So, hey, what's with the other 35%, right? They're out there because they're pissed off with, and they just don't believe that the two parties, especially the Democratic Party, really care about their interests. And they are right. So what? So from a perspective of a conscious socialist, let's say, and I think that all of our contributors to the book still follow the notion of socialism, these folks need to be flexible. Flexible. What is wrong with walking and talking at the same time? What is wrong with walking and chewing gum? What is wrong with organizing within the Democratic Party and simultaneously organizing outside of the Democratic Party? Where when you add together, when you accrete those two huge sectors, that is where the base of transformational change is going to happen. It's inside and outside. The left, I think, is afraid to broach that idea, either because they think that, I don't know, you look at the different segments and each will have its own reason for not getting involved in that dual way of thinking. Being flexible and being relaxed about, okay, let's do this. It's just one priority. This is what we are good at. And I don't have examples to come off the top of my head, but we are not good at electoral politics, let's say. but we're very good at radical education around this or that issue. We're very good at building local bases, and I think that point that Lenina points to about, you know, I think what's going on in Brooklyn, there seem to be a lot of leftists out there who are sunk into those communities out there. They're thinking we got to build power within this or that section of Brooklyn. In the Bronx, building power locally and not worrying if that power takes you, if that struggle takes you into some sort of involvement with the Democratic Party, because, you know, you're going to, that's where you're going to meet a lot of people that you can influence and change, but not necessarily buy into all of what the Democratic Party is all about. So those are just some quick thoughts. I don't know if it responds to any of the folks on Facebook.
Hey y'all. Kazembe over here. Hey. Remember me? And I said, I'm a little quiet because I've taken a lot of this information in, and I wanted to respond specifically to the question about internationalism as it relates specifically to New York City, because I think it's a very important point, and I think that it also touches upon some of this question around inside-outside strategies and whatever. And like, to me, I think part of myself is that, you know, well, let me just, first of all, let's just state my opinion. One thing that really, one album that was seminal for me was an album that came out in 1998 called Puerto Rican Soul. And I don't know if you guys remember this album. If you don't, look it up on Spotify. But everybody who was involved in the group that we were part of, the Student Liberation Action Movement, listened to this album. It had Roy Ayers on it, La India, a bunch of, you know, Latino and African-American artists on it. And what really hit me really hard was this term New Yorican, right? And the specificality around New York. Because what I realized is that New York has a different flavor than other parts of the country because it was influenced by the Caribbean. And it brought into it a majority consciousness, specifically amongst Black folks. You know, and so when we're talking about people like Arturo Schomburg, or we're talking about folks who came from Jamaica, you know, they were saying to the world, you are not a minority, because we come from a majority country. You're the majority. And people like Malcolm X took that philosophy and were like, no. You're not a minority, you're a majority. And there's something specifically about that cross-cutting, because we were specifically located on 68th Street in the middle of the city. And so we were taking in all the influences, all the eclecticism of all parts of the city. I came from uptown. I knew people from downtown, from the village or whatever, right? And that was a really important point of departure in terms of developing a politic, right? A politic of critical mass and critical mix, right? And so that idea of New Yorkerness, or the idea of the New Yorkerness of the Pacific movements, was important in terms of creating that kind of countercultural space for sustainability. And one of the things I see for young people today is that there's a demand for what they call intersectionality. And so the question around Puerto Rico today is also connected to issues around environmental concerns, is an issue around feminism, you know, saying specifically what you do with people's bodies, is issue around land sovereignty and the right to land, and also the larger sense of independence, but not only independence of the Puerto Rican landmass, but also the question around citizenship. You know, saying who are we as a people? And so for myself, my solidarity begins with this, with the Puerto Rican imaginary, you know, saying that exists outside of the framework of U.S. domination and colonialization, and one that asserts itself as autonomous and independent. You know what I'm saying? So for me, from my perspective, when I look at the Puerto Rican movement, I'm like, y'all always got your political prisoners out. You know what I'm saying? Like, y'all always were like, when it came to Puerto Rican political prisoners out, like Oscar and them and the rest of those people, y'all got them out. You know what I'm saying? Because you were able to activate that sensibility around that, but specifically that identity, but of that imaginary, but also making it into a material force, a reality. Someone told me the other day, like, they would have demonstrations and they would put people in cages and be like, you will go in the cage and be like, you're Oscar Lopez Rivera. You know what I'm saying? And that's a very powerful thing, that empathy of solidarity. And so for me, when I look at the garden photos, I think about what Lenina talks about in that terms of that cultural part of creating that idea of empathy and solidarity and turning that into a material force. And I guess that's the kind of question that I kind of come up with a little bit in terms of this particular time now, because I feel that when we're talking about these movements and we're talking about this in a way, and one of the people, I mean, I want to mention so many people, but I'm thinking a lot of times of like, you know, we have this debate right now around West Side Story and Up in the Heights. And what I realized around the question around Perry Thomas was the specificality around Down These Mean Streets. And so that book was actually dealing with the idea of Black identity within Puerto Rican identities. And so my question is also like, how do we even understand this question around identity in terms of relationship to empire? Because it seems to me that we'd have this question around, we're going up, it's not down these streets, it's up in the heights. No, we're traveling, we're like in the 70s with Black folks, it was the Jeffersons moving on up. You know what I'm saying? And so Up in the Heights and the Jeffersons kind of have this specific political sensibility. So I'm, as someone who's a native New Yorker, and I'm gonna say this again, gentrification, identity, choosing how we consider ourselves citizenship and the idea of what is Puerto Rican at this moment. You know what I'm saying? And is it a resistance to Pacific white coloniality? Is it a solidarity with Black folks? Is it something completely different? Is it intersectional? Like, what are we talking about? And I mean, I hope that's not a difficult question, but I want to kind of like phrase that in a way that will allow us to kind of, because that's a question that's coming up right now. Like, what is Puerto Rico right now, and what are Puerto Rico's relationship to mainland?
A lot of those errors, oh, I'm sorry. A lot of those errors were committed in the context of massive repression, counterinsurgency, efforts on the part of the empire to destroy all of these movements. And the failure to overcome those things in a particular round of struggle should not be looked at one-sidedly in terms of, what did we do wrong? Well, that reversal was a worldwide reversal, right? It wasn't just in the United States that, there was a moment when the empire was in deep trouble or appeared to be in deep trouble, and it took some major hits, and then it recovered. The empire is in trouble now, right? It's a different configuration of forces. We don't have, you don't have sort of whatever the tricontinental spirit or the spirit of, it's a different situation. But I think, you know, the value of disciplined organization and its ability to sort of distill and clarify a path forward when you're surrounded by noise. I mean, I think we've been surrounded by noise forever, right? It's not just the creation of social media, but certainly social media makes it worse in many ways. But movements need organizations that have that sort of clarity and that ability to move forward, and that's worth struggling for. Not to say it's an easy thing to achieve, but so I want to hear a little more nostalgia. I think what you did was incredible, right? Not just the PSP, but other folks, right? People built revolutionary organizations, revolutionary anti-imperialist, socialist, communist, whatever you want to call them, organizations in the heart of the beast, right? Under conditions that were really actually quite adverse. And I think that's something that, you know, I'm not young, but I think that's something that young people need to hear. I mean, I teach that my students want to know what is to be done. And I think, you know, it's fine to go over all of the errors that were committed, but also tell us how you built those organizations, because that is really very important information as well.
There was somebody online who asked a question. I don't want to make them think that we didn't hear it, about the national spread of the PSP. So maybe Vivian, can you talk about that on the ground?
Oh, okay. Maria Aguilar, who was a leader in Boston. And I understand your love of New York, Kazembe. But many of our members would do a lot of pushback when we were emphasizing New York. Although at that time, that's where the majority of the Puerto Ricans were. But we did have and we did organize throughout the country where the Puerto Rican community existed, where there were strong communities. And so we had several chapters in New Jersey. We had a chapter in Boston, which you know, these groupings, this base was very involved in the struggles, you know, the struggles in Newark, when the Newark uprisings of the 70s around police brutality and the killing of a Puerto Rican in the community. You know, we were there and we were organized, and we organized with the African American community. Amiri Baraka was very involved in that with the PSP. In Boston, there was organizing around the South Ends, you know, trying to kind of rezone and gentrify that area. And from that came Villa Victoria, which the PSP and many other organizations were involved in, including El Comité. So, you know, there was that. Chicago had a very strong base, organized in the university as well as then in the community. A lot of struggle around gentrification, again, around repression. One of the members of the PSP who was a professor was killed, and that was always something that was never really looked into in detail. But, you know, so there was that. They were organizing in Indiana, organizing in California, which is where Soilo came into the PSP, in LA and in San Francisco. So it was, you know, and obviously throughout New York City, we had many base chapters, several in Manhattan, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, so that was a there was a moment there beginning with the transformation of the MPI. The Movimiento Pro Independencia was the predecessor to the PSP. And it's in 71 where in Puerto Rico, the MPI becomes PSP. In 1973, the US branch holds its Congress and then formally becomes the PSP US branch. That was a significant moment as well. There were 3,000 people that attended that Congress at Manhattan Center. So yes, I agree with you that we don't shy away from. Jose likes to talk about the contradictions. I talk about the contradictions, but I also want to recognize that people struggled, people gave, and sacrificed during this period, and in many ways gave a lot to this movement and to this struggle and to the creation of an organization that had incredible influence throughout the country. Yes, there are mistakes, but we see some of these things that happen now. We were young, we were sectarian, we thought we knew it all. And all of us did that within our own organizations, right? And so sometimes when we could have come together, we didn't. That's a lesson. That is a lesson for now, because I see that within young groupings here. People don't understand that if you can find one place of common ground, where do we have the greatest influence in building beyond just the PSP? It was when we found an issue that united us all. The political prisoners united us all. The freedom of the 5 nationalist prisoners united the Puerto Rican left. And we brought together incredible demonstrations around that. And so that's important. Building coalitions is a very important thing. Figuring out, finding that common ground, those one issues that can unite us, and to come together around that. Beyond the fact, and then knowing that, yes, you can go off then and do your other things. There may be other issues. And yes, we worked around intersectionality. We just didn't call it that. But we always made those links that the struggle, whether it was the struggle for independence and the struggle for bettering our situation here in the United States, that was intersectionality. Understanding that issues around gender inequality, that was looking at intersectionality. We didn't always quite do that well. And many times we thought that the more long-term strategic question of getting independence for Puerto Rico, that was more important. And so sometimes women's issues were not put at that level, or issues around community struggles. But yes, there were victories, there were great things that did occur. Thank you for bringing up all of those. And there was that sense of community that went beyond just our national borders. It was an internationalism that emanated in that period, in that time, and that I think is important for people to continue to do today, which I think we do. I think young people do.
We got to say thank you.
Yeah.
Wait, before we go, just want to say one last thing really quickly. And I know we're gonna have some time for folks to chat informally and talk and to do stuff. Also, the book is available for sale over there. I encourage you, if you don't have a copy, also get a copy. Also, just to know that this book is made to be studied. And so we're asking folks that if you're interested in having a similar conversation like this with your local circle, young folks, church groups or whatever, Viv and Jose are very interested in participating in that via Zoom, and maybe bringing other people involved as well. So if you want to do a local thing like this on Zoom, it can be organized around the book. But I want to thank everyone for tonight, for a great time. Viv, Jose, can we give them a hand? Jose? Ted, I was going to say Ted, Lenina, y'all, And I would definitely guys encourage you guys. And of course, thank you so much to the People's Forum, the sister in the back for doing the tech work, and all the people out in the YouTube land for joining us tonight. We have 30 people in YouTube land. Be sure to get the copy of the book via Temple University Press if you're not here tonight. All right, thank you so much.
We do have to leave soon. We don't want to keep the staff here of People's Forum beyond the 9 o'clock hour, so we may not be able to mingle too much. But we are available, so keep in touch.